Today, I'm continuing stories Gnawing Betel to seek Agarwood. Chapter 4. Losing Sanity. After 2 hours in the intensive care unit, receiving intravenous nutrition, Vin finally regained consciousness. He was moved to the recovery room, where his mother, Mai, and his cousin, Tung, came to visit. Mai held his hand and tearfully asked, "My son, are you feeling better? Is there anything you want to eat? Are you feeling better? I was so worried about you." At that moment, Vin suddenly said, "Wait, Mum, Tony, when did I come back? Why am I lying here? What happened to me that I'm in the hospital? Who brought me here? And where are the others who went with me?" Both Tony and Mai were bewildered by Vin's barrage of questions. Mai asked, "What are you talking about, Vin? Didn't you come home on your own this afternoon? You fainted in front of the house, and Tung had the neighbor's car take you to the hospital." Vin shook his head and said, "Why don't I remember anything? I only remember being in the forest with the others. How did I end up here? Are you and Tony hiding something from me?" Hearing this, Mai began to cry, and Tony, standing next to her, patted her shoulder and said, "Aunt, stay here with him. I'll go find the doctor." Tony rushed to find the doctor they had seen earlier. Meeting him in the hospital corridor, Tony called out, "Doctor, doctor, I need to ask you something." The doctor recognized Tony and asked, "Oh, it's you. Has your brother regained consciousness?" Tony quickly replied, "Yes, he's awake, but please come and examine him again. He doesn't remember anything that just happened and keeps talking about events from nearly a month ago, as if he's lost his memory." The doctor adjusted his glasses and said, "All right, you lead the way, and I'll come check on him." Tony led the doctor to Vin's room. Mai, seeing the doctor arrive, tearfully said, "Doctor, please help my son. Why has he forgotten everything that just happened?" The doctor reassured her, "Please stay calm. Let me check on him." The doctor approached Vin, using his stethoscope to listen to his chest, checking his pupils, and asking Vin if he could recognize everything around him. Vin answered all the questions correctly. Then the doctor asked, "Do you know why you're in the hospital? What were you doing before this?" Vin immediately replied, "No, I don't know why I'm here. I just remember being in the forest with the others, looking for Agarwood. And now I'm here. I feel fine, doctor. Can you let me go home?" The doctor sternly replied, "If you go home now, you'll be planning your own funeral in a day or two. Just stay here and rest. There's no way I'd keep you here if you weren't sick." Afterward, the doctor pulled Tony aside and said, "I can't conclude anything about your brother yet. I need to consult a specialist in neurology. Let me call a nurse to take him for further tests." The doctor left, and shortly after, 2 nurses arrived to wheel Vin away, saying, "We're taking him for a CT scan now. Family members can follow us to help with his belongings." Tony and Mai followed the nurses to the CT scan room. They watched through the glass as the doctor from earlier, along with another specialist, prepared Vin for the scan. He was slowly moved into the CT machine. 15 minutes later, Vin was wheeled out of the machine. helped by the nurses to change into a clean gown, and then returned to his hospital room. Mai followed the bed, while Tony stayed behind to talk to the doctors about Vin's condition. The two doctors led Tony to an office, where they placed the CT scan images on a light box for him to see. One of them spoke. After the CT scan, we discovered a large blood clot on the back of your brother's brain, located in a very dangerous area. We can't guarantee that surgery would be 100% successful. In fact, we can't even guarantee 30%. This clot is likely causing the memory loss. Additionally, it seems your brother experienced something traumatic, which caused his brain to overload, leading to this amnesia. For now, let him be. The clot isn't affecting his daily life. Over time, his lost memories might return on their own. Let's keep him in the hospital for a few more days to monitor his condition. Tony thanked the doctors profusely for their help. He returned to Vin's room and said to Mai, "Aunt, stay here with him. I'm going to get some porridge for you both. And then I'll head home to update my wife so she doesn't worry." Tony bought porridge for Mai and Vin, then took a motorbike taxi home. On the way, he stopped by Vin's house to pick up the Agarwood and brought it to his own home. 10 years ago, Tung had been a seasoned Agarwood hunter, but after surviving a fall off a cliff, he had stopped. As soon as he arrived home, his wife Fan rushed out. Seeing him, she scolded. "Why did you take so long to bring food to Aunt Mai? I thought you were going to the fields after delivering the food. But you disappeared. I was about to report you missing to the police." Tony laughed and pulled his wife inside, closing the door, and said, "I'm back, aren't I? Oh, by the way, can you get the savings?" Vin returned from the forest this afternoon but fainted. So Aunt Mai and I took him to the hospital. He's awake now, so I came home to tell you. We'll need some money for his hospital fees. So I'll borrow what we have, and we can figure out the rest later. His wife, concerned, asked, "Oh, really? Is he seriously ill? Is he okay now?" "We don't have much money left, and I was saving it for Thomas's university exams. If we give it to them, how will our son take his exams?" Tony petarded the bundle in his hand and said, "Do you know what Vin brought back?" His wife looked at the bundle, curious, but shook her head. Tony then unwrapped the bag to reveal a dark, fragrant piece of agarwood. His wife exclaimed, "Oh my God, where did you get such a large piece of agarwood? Don't tell me Vin struck gold on this trip." Fearing someone might overhear, Tony quickly covered her mouth and whispered, "That's right, he struck gold this time. Guess how much this piece is worth?" His wife shook her head, saying, "How would I know? You're the one who sells it. But it's great that he made such a big find this time. All his hard work paid off." Tony nodded and said, "That's why I asked you to give me the money for the hospital fees." His wife agreed and went to get the money. Tony hid the agarwood in a safe place, took the money from his wife, and went back to the hospital to pay Vin's bills. 2 days later, Vin was discharged and sent home. Maya, now that her son was back, seemed to recover quickly, and the doctor confirmed that her condition was improving. After Vin returned home, Tony contacted a Chinese trader he had known 10 years ago to inform him of the agarwood for sale. The trader, overjoyed, rushed overnight to Tony's house, Then, still unable to recall what had happened, was told by Tony that the Agarwood was his find. The Chinese trader was brought into Tony's house, where Tony revealed the piece of Agarwood. The trader held it in his hands, exclaiming, "My heavens! I've been trading Agarwood for decades, and have never seen such a pure piece. No need to negotiate. This piece..." He paused and spread his hands to show the value. Knowing the worth of the Agarwood, Tony replied, "Do you think I don't know its value? If you're not serious, we'll stop right here." The trader quickly hugged the Agarwood and spoke hurriedly. "No, don't say that. I was just joking. How about this?" He offered a substantial sum, and Tony nodded in agreement, saying, "Now that's better. We can maintain a good relationship this way. If we find the right buyer, this could be worth even more. But I'll let you have it, considering our history." The trader, ecstatic, quickly handed over a suitcase filled with US dollars, saying, "There's more here than I promised. Do you want to count it?" Tony waved him off, saying, "No need. I trust you." Then Tony turned to Vin, handing him the suitcase, and said, "This is the money from selling the Agarwood. Since you found it, what do you plan to do with the money? But first, we should deposit it in the bank for safety." After the trader left, Tony and Vin went to the bank to exchange and deposit the money. Vin kept some cash to pay Tony back for the hospital fees, and even gave him some extra for his family. Gnawing Betel to seek Agarwood. Chapter 5. Tony's Past. Back in the village of Brop, after eliminating all those who had trespassed into their sacred forest, it seemed as though the forest had returned to its previous peaceful state. However, Ken was still worried that one day someone might come back to this forest and take away the very thing they revered the most. Ken came up with a plan to create a female ghost to guard the forest. To begin his plan, Ken started walking around the village daily, making several rounds each day. The villagers were familiar with Ken, so they didn't pay much attention to his unusual behavior. In reality, Ken was observing the women in the village, searching for a virgin, beautiful and pure, whom he could turn into the most powerful guardian spirit of the forest. After finding his target, Ken began to prepare a black powder. This powder was made from dried forest herbs that he'd ground into a fine dust. The powder would cause severe stomach pain in those who ingested it. Pain so intense that they would eventually die if not treated by Ken himself. On the day he planned to execute his plan, Ken made his way to the chosen girl's house under the cover of darkness. The girl he had selected was Nua, the most beautiful flower in the entire village of Brop, with fair skin, rosy lips, and long, silky hair. Her parents were also considered the most handsome elders in the village. Taking advantage of the night, Ken slipped the black powder into the family's drinking water and then returned home to await the results. As expected, the next morning, someone came rushing to Ken's house, banging on the door and shouting, Ken, come quickly. Something's wrong at Nua's house. They're writhing on the ground in agony." Ken, having anticipated this, grabbed his small medicine bag and followed the person back to Nua's house. When he arrived, he saw the entire family of 3 rolling on the ground, clutching their stomachs in pain. Ken took out a vial of black liquid from his bag and carefully poured it into each of their mouths. One by one, after ingesting the liquid, the 3 family members stopped writhing and lay still. Suddenly, they all coughed up a mouthful of black, foul-smelling blood, causing the onlookers to step back in fear. Someone asked Ken, "Ken, what's happening to them?" Ken quickly replied, "They've been cursed by the forest spirit. This spirit is very powerful, and it won't stop until it has killed them. If we don't drive it out of them, it will bring harm to the entire village." Another villager asked, "What should we do now, Ken?" Ken answered, "Let's wait a little longer and see." The liquid Ken had given to the 3 was an antidote, but in very different doses. He gave a large dose to Nua's parents and a smaller dose to Nua. Her parents were the first to cough, up blood due to the overdose, while Nua, having received a smaller dose, only spat out a little blood. Her parents soon succumbed to the effects of the overdose, their bodies convulsing briefly before they died. Nua, in despair, ran to hold her parents and begged, "Please, Ken, save my parents. I beg you." At this moment, Ken coldly replied, "You've been cursed by the forest spirits. I can't save them anymore. The spirits have claimed them, and their bodies must be burned immediately to prevent the spirit from escaping and killing more people. If you want to live, come with me into the forest, and I'll try to save you." Nua wept bitterly as she held on to her parents' bodies, pleading, "Please, don't take my parents away. They aren't cursed by the spirits. Please, I beg you." But the villagers only listened to Ken. They knew they had to burn the bodies quickly to prevent further disaster. The bodies of Nua's parents were carried to the edge of the forest, where large pyres were built. The bodies were placed on top, and the fire was lit, illuminating the entire forest. Meanwhile, Ken led Nua deep into the forest, telling the villagers that he was taking her to receive treatment. He led her to a small cave where he often performed his dark rituals. Once inside the cave, Ken stripped Nua of her clothing and tied her up tightly. Despite her cries and pleas for mercy, he was unmoved. After stripping her, he began applying a golden liquid all over her body. This liquid, made from a special method of processing forest ginseng, was meant to purify her. After coating her body with the liquid, Ken forced a black pill into her mouth, which immediately dissolved, releasing a faint, pleasant fragrance. Nu, who had been begging for mercy, suddenly fell silent. Her eyes glazed over as if she were hypnotized. With Nua's mind now under his control, Ken began feeding her spoonfuls of a liquid made from Lin Forest ginseng. He planned to keep her alive for 30 days, on a diet of this ginseng water to cleanse her body of all impurities. According to his beliefs, eating normal food created impurities in the body, but consuming forest ginseng would purify it. After completing his preparations, Ken placed Nua in a smaller, more secluded cave. He even built a door outside in case she woke up and tried to escape. With everything in place, Ken returned to the village. When the villagers asked about Nua, he lied without blinking. "The forest spirits have tormented her nearly to death. I've locked her deep in the forest, hoping the mountain spirits will drive out the evil. We can only hope she survives." Meanwhile, back with Vin and Tony. After they agreed to search for Agarwood together, Tony said to Vin, "Stay home and wait for me for a month or so. I used to go searching for Agarwood with some local tribesmen who are skilled in making charms to ward off forest tigers and spirits. I'll head up to the district to ask them to make us some charms. If possible, I'll invite them to join us. Having more people will make it safer." Vin nodded in agreement. Tony wasted no time saying goodbye to his wife and set off on his motorbike to Conray District. He followed a narrow trail through the forest, sometimes getting stuck in muddy sections that reached halfway up his wheels. After 2 days of difficult travel, Tony finally arrived at a remote village deep in the forest. The only way into the village was through a treacherous path that deterred most visitors. However, Tony had been here many times before, so he rode straight to the end of the village and stopped in front of a rickety stilt house. As soon as he put down the kickstand, he called out loudly, "Paul, are you home? Come out and greet your old friend. Paul, are you there?" On the second call, a rough, slightly accented voice responded from inside the house. Yes, I'm here. Who's calling me?" "Wait a minute." The floorboards of the stilt house creaked as a man came out. When he saw Tony, he squinted his eyes for a moment, then exclaimed, "My goodness, is that really you, Tony? It's been so long since you've last visited me." With that, the man quickly descended the wooden ladder, running over to Tony and grabbing him by the shoulders, shaking him excitedly. "Ha, come on up to my house. Today we must drink rice wine together." The 2 men went up to Paul Rickety Stilt House. The front of the house was simple, with a fire pit in the middle. The rafters and beams were lined with various items, including dried meat and corn. There was another house at the back, from which a faint scent of incense occasionally wafted out. After sitting Tony down on the floor, Paul said, "It's been so long since you last visited. I almost didn't recognize you, Tony. Let me get some wine. No good conversation happens without wine." With that, Paul heaved out a 10-liter jar of rice wine, which had 2 bamboo straws already in place, and set it down in front of Tony. "Drink, Tony. I made this wine myself. I only bring it out for special guests. Wait while I fetch some smoked meat for us to eat." Paul grabbed a string of blackened, smoked meat from above the fire, knocked off the dust, and split it open to reveal the tender pink meat inside. The 2 men sat, drinking wine, nibbling on the meat, and reminiscing about their past adventures searching for Agarwood in the deep, mysterious forests. Finally, Paul asked Tony, "You've come to see me for a reason, haven't you? You wouldn't have made such a long trip otherwise. Are you planning another expedition?" Tony nodded and, without hiding anything, recounted all the events of the past few years. Too, Paul including everything about Vin, and how they found the Agarwood. He concluded, "I want to take Vin back to where he went before. If we get..."
Asterisk the story Gnawing Betel to seek Agarwood, chapters 6 and 7. I will continue on Saturday night at 10 p.m. Thank you for supporting the Real Ghost Stories channel.